Hello and welcome to another edition of Suzi's Book Bag, hosted by me, Suzi Fay. So I have picked this little bag as the theme for today's talk. I think it's mostly about kids' books, but it says Roaring Rebels, Big Dreamers, Mischief Makers, Epic Explorers. We're going to be talking about all of this, or as much as we can manage in the next hour or so. Would it surprise you if I told you we're mostly going to be talking, well, exclusively going to be talking about Croydon? All of these marvellous things are in this book. We are going to be talking about Croydonopolis. I don't know if it's a love letter to that London borough, but let us say hello to Will Noble, author of the book. Hi, Will. Is it a love letter to Croydon?
It's a good question. Yeah, I suppose in a way it is. I moved to Croydon a couple of years ago, and it's a place that has a certain reputation, I think, not necessarily all positive. So I think, yeah, the book is kind of delving into the history of Croydon and discovering the real place. And that I like to think there's some pretty fascinating stuff in its past, and some good stuff going on now as well.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing, actually, the stuff that you have dug up. I mean, one of the things I think about the book is probably everywhere is special. You know, everywhere has stories, everywhere has extraordinary people, everywhere has a kind of cultural life. But the reason for choosing Croydon is, as you say, its reputation. I mean, its reputation precedes it to people who've never even been to Croydon.
Exactly.
How did that sort of come about, do you think?
It's a good question. I mean, I think so. This reputation of Croydon, as you know, not the greatest place in the world. You can trace it back as far as people like Henry VIII, because Henry VIII came here back in the day, and he said that it was a place that made him feel kind of sick. And I think that he actually meant that in a very physical way, because of he was staying in the old town where it was, you know, often damp and flooded and stuff like that. So it kind of, you know, the place made him feel rheumatic. There've been you know, ever since then, there have been people kind of dissing Croydon every now and again. I think the most famous quote is from David Bowie, who was sort of interviewed for this music magazine in the late 90s, and he basically said that Croydon was his nemesis, and it was everything that he stood against. And you know, he said, basically, you know, it's the worst thing I can say about anybody. God, it's so effing Croydon. Where it comes from, in particular, I would say, kind of like you can like people criticizing Croydon en masse as sort of seeing it as a punchline probably spans back to the era of Croydonization, which has kind of, you know, started post-war in the late 50s, and this is when Croydon sort of starts just basically levels the town centre and destroys all of these amazing buildings, and kind of turns into this, or like turns itself into a kind of American boomtown. And that's where you get the whole, you know, it turns sort of almost overnight, it turns into a totally different place. And I think, you know, just all that glass and concrete and whatever, and some people would say that that's where it kind of loses its soul a bit. So it kind of wakes up at some point in the 1970s and goes, you know, what the hell have I done to myself?
And is there something about it being a big transport hub as well, that people kind of whiz through it on the way to somewhere else and kind of go, what the hell was that I just passed through?
Yeah, it is. Like, I think it's kind of Croydon's just obviously, you know, it's described as a dormitory town, but I think it's kind of, you know, historically it's almost been more of a staging post. So this you can trace this back to the archbishops of Canterbury who were coming to Croydon for centuries, because there was Croydon Palace, which is actually still here now, and the archbishops would stop off in Croydon, between Canterbury and London. And so that's where this kind of this idea as Croydon as somewhere that you pass through begins. Obviously back then Croydon, even the centre of Croydon, was really beautiful, and Croydon Palace was sort of surrounded by all these orchards and streams bristling with trout and all that kind of thing. Later on, sort of in the sort of mid 18th century, you get Brighton becomes this resort suddenly, because there's a guy called Dr. Richard Russell who publishes this book. The title is extremely long. It's like a whole paragraph, but he basically says, you should bathe in the sea and you should drink seawater. So you get all of these people sort of suddenly kind of wanting to do wellness stuff, and they travel to Brighton. They're traveling down to Brighton, and again Croydon is en route. So people are stopping off at Croydon. All of these lovely coaching inns are built, and it again. So the funny thing about Croydon is, like, it has always been in this really fantastic geographic location, which I think people don't necessarily appreciate. It's just outside London, but it's also kind of on the fringe of the North Downs. So you've got this beautiful countryside, which is inside the borough of Croydon, and also the links to places like Brighton and nowadays Gatwick Airport. So it's one of the best connected places in the country, I think.
Well, you also make the point that it has this sort of double face, in that half the residents think they're in South London and half the residents think they're in Surrey. I mean, that's part of the Croydon story as well. This sort of, what exactly is it?
It's funny, yeah. People sort of, feel very strongly about that, and it really does depend who you speak to. I think people of a certain age will tell you it is in Surrey, and that's kind of fair enough, because it was, it always was in Surrey until the Greater London Act comes along in 1965. It very much was in Surrey, but literally overnight, it becomes part of London. But it's funny, because I find that estate agents, if you look in an estate agent window in Croydon, they always say Surrey, and it's like, it's not it hasn't been in Surrey for a long time, but there's obviously, for whatever reason, they've kind of worked out that it's actually more saleable to say Surrey than London in this case.
So Croydon fun fact number 1 would be it has 2 palaces, and Croydon fun fact number 2 would be, I believe there are, is it 11 archbishops buried in Croydon? Yeah,
that is true. So there are Croydon Minster, which is right next to Croydon Palace. I think that's got 6 archbishops buried there, and then you've got another 5 at Addington Palace, which is a little bit further out of town, but it's where the archbishops kind of moved later on. So the big one is John Whitgift. So if you come to Croydon, you'll quickly notice a lot of things are called Whitgift. There's, most famous of all, there's the Whitgift shopping centre, but there are also sort of Whitgift roads and news agents and everything. So he's the archbishop who sort of rocks up in the late 16th century, and kind of he really like falls in love with Croydon like no other archbishop. And he also, Elizabeth I likes hanging out with him, so she's in Croydon quite a lot as well, which I quite like the idea of her. She comes to watch the horse racing at Croydon quite a bit, which is kind of a bit difficult to get your head around. But yeah, anyway, John Whitgift, but basically he puts his money where his mouth is, and he starts buying up land in Croydon and investing in it, and building. The first thing he builds are these armed houses for the elderly, poor of Croydon, and then he builds a schoolhouse pretty quickly afterwards. But he's kind of that legacy is now continued in like the Whitgift Foundation, who still own a lot of the land today. But yeah, Whitgift is buried at the Minster, and his tomb, I think it burned, the Minster burned down in Victorian times, so the tomb that's there now is a replica, I think. But it's a really beautiful tomb. But he's sort of the founding father of Croydon, if you will.
Well, he's our big dreamer, I would say, from the bag. He is the big dreamer. I mean, we're going to sort of leap around in time here, because the book sort of is thematic, isn't it? But epic explorers, I would have people like Amy Johnson, for example. Now, the aerodrome is huge in this story, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, it's the most exciting and I think surprising piece of history. I think there are a lot of people who still don't realise that Croydon was basically home to the first international airport. It comes about during the First World War, when you've got Zeppelin raids and airship raids on London and on Croydon, and basically an airfield is established in Beddington, sort of on the edge of Croydon. And initially, I think it's just two planes or something, 2 planes and 2 pilots, and they sort of like, apparently they kind of sleep by a phone, and they wait to be woken up by this phone in the middle of the night saying, there's a Zeppelin, can you like get up in the air and try to shoot it down? But after the war, I think Hounslow was technically doing international flights sort of in 1919, but it's the land is requisitioned post-war, so Croydon is chosen as this site for the international airport, and so it opens sort of properly in 1920, but it's this sort of real kind of ramshackle assemblage of wooden huts, and the air traffic control tower is basically a shed on stilts, and there are stories of people having to shoo sheep off the runway so the planes can take off. So it's this fantastic sort of wild west of a place, really, but it's kind of full of adventure and excitement, and you get all of these incredible pilots. I mean, many of whom had obviously just fought in the war, but you get these like lots of women pilots as well, which is fantastic. And I think I think at the time, sort of in the 20s, women weren't allowed to drive the trams in Croydon, but you could fly a plane. That was absolutely fine. So yeah, there's Croydon sort of becomes this hub of a sort of start finish point for all these adventures. It's everyone's trying to break records left, right, and centre and fly to these far-flung parts of the world. So you get people like Bert Hinkler, who was like an Australian guy, who I think is known as the Lone Eagle or something, but he basically sets off from Croydon in 1928 and flies solo, becomes the first person to fly solo from Britain to Australia. And this is just followed by this whole slew of record breakers, as it must have been such an exciting place to be.
And also quite noisy as well. I mean, Croydonians were complaining a little bit about the rattle and roll of the planes as they flew over.
Yeah, I mean, it was there were some low flying planes, and there were quite a few instances where you've got planes crashing into houses, which is terrible. Because I mean, Croydon, one of the problems with Croydon Airport was always the fog, because I think it was something to do in particular with its situation at the foot of the North Downs, and so there was always this sort of fog lingering. And there were lots of instances of planes kind of either trying to take off or land and sort of not quite getting it right, and plowing into houses and stuff. So I don't know that, there was certainly an element of danger if you had a house near the aerodrome at the time. But I mean, the stories, like, I mean, yeah, the number of stories of crashes are absolutely ludicrous. Some of them are almost comical because, the ones that aren't tragic, they're comical in that there was one instance of a Daimler, was it a DH34 or something, sort of like landing on the runway, but actually landing on top of another Daimler, and they both got smashed up, totaled, and the whole fleet that they had was only 3 planes, so they basically totaled their fleet. And there was one great story of, I don't know if this was, I think it must have been a plane taking off from Croydon, but a passenger sort of looks out of the window mid-flight and sees an engineer on the wing trying to fix the throttle. So it was really, it was an exciting time, but also a pretty dangerous time as well.
Well, you make the point that the planes were sort of slower, so in a way, you know, if you did crash, you could sort of come down reasonably gently. I mean, when the plane landed on the other plane, everybody survived, didn't they?
Yeah. No one. I think there was some minor bruising, which is incredible. But yeah, you get these stories of pilots kind of dusting themselves off. There was another plane that sort of crashed somewhere in the centre of Croydon and narrowly missed a tram. And then there's the next thing, I think the pilot is being handed a boiled egg by someone, like through their kitchen window or something. So it's it's almost sitcom like. But yeah, you're right. It's because planes were traveling a lot lower and slower, and so crashes were a lot more frequent. But if you were in an air crash these days, you probably wouldn't be expected to survive. But back then, people were sort of brushing themselves off left, right, and centre.
So the aerodrome was pretty much a success, and the pioneer, and in a way, the sort of model for every international airport in the world, with shops and coffee bars and so on. But would it be true to say, I mean, picking out a theme from the book, that Croydon is very often first at something, but it sort of cocks that thing up a bit?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I kind of Croydon I sort of depict as this place that it truly is pioneering and like incredibly ambitious, but it just so often bites off more than it can chew. So there's in the 1840s, as railway mania is kind of sweeping the nation and everyone's getting into steam trains, Croydon decides that it's going to build an atmospheric railway, which is basically kind of a vacuum powered railway where you've got this pipe sort of running through the middle of the 2 rails, and then the train is attached to this by a sort of a rod and propelled forwards. And it's actually really, really clever. It's very fast. I think the trains could go 70 miles an hour plus. They were quiet. They didn't, the trains themselves were actually kind of fuelless. And even Isambard Kingdom Brunel was like, wow, this isn't a bad idea. So he goes off and builds his own atmospheric railway. But it's just, then things start to go wrong, and this seems to be a recurring theme for Croydon. So in this case, the vacuum often starts to fail, and the trains kind of stop, just stop, and then passengers are told to get out and maybe give the train a bit of a push to help it on its way, and then the trains will shoot off without the passengers. And there, all these kind of things where Croydon's got the right idea, but then it just doesn't quite get it right. There's also an interesting story where I think it was in the 1940s. There's a guy called Hilary Page, and he basically invents what is it called? It's called the self-locking building brick, and it's a children's toy, and it's kind of made from plastic, so it might sound a bit familiar to people. And basically, he invents what will become Lego, more or less. but he has a go at it, and it doesn't take off for him. It doesn't work, and and Lego end up going with a similar idea, and the rest is history. So it's that kind of thing where Croydon's got the right idea and it's ahead of the curve, but then so close.
And there is some weird firsts, aren't there? I mean, your traffic firsts are very interesting. You know what I mean?
Well, I think I know what you mean. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, Croydon's got this really interesting relationship with sort of wheeled vehicles, I guess, because even if we go back to the mid 18th century, it had this booming sort of carriage making trade. It was kind of almost like the motor city of its day. But then obviously later on, proper cars come along. And so, yes, I believe the first person to be, or the first pedestrian in this country to be run over and killed by a car was a Croydonian, and it happened. Her name was Bridget Driscoll, and it actually happened at Crystal Palace, so just outside Croydon, but she was from Croydon, and it was a motor car that was, I think it was, it's really difficult to get your head around this, but apparently it was driving at 4 miles an hour. So you kind of it's sort of how you get killed by that. I mean, I'm not quite sure, but also the guy who was driving it was apparently driving on the right-hand side of the road as opposed to the left, because it was he reasoned because it was a French car. So really sort of tragic, but it's a very, very strange happening. And then I think the first fatality in a car as well was came shortly after that, and that was also in Croydon. But I mean, Croydon's got some more positive motoring history as well. Back in the 60s, it was creating the Trojan bubble cars, like those fantastic little things, and they were they were really cool, and sort of I think summed up the kind of futuristic sci-fi place that Croydon had kind of become at that time. It was also producing loads of Lambretta scooters at this time, and they were pretty cool. So yeah, some positive things as well.
So epic explorers of the air we've dealt with, big dreamers, mischief makers and roaring rebels. I think we can fold together in the kind of the music scene. I mean, I love the story about Trojan Records, famous reggae label, and its link with Croydon, and also you have people like Stormzy coming from Croydon, which I did not know.
Yeah, Stormzy's from Thornton Heath, and he used to go to Thornton Heath Library when he was a kid, and he became obsessed with earning the badges that you get for reading books. So I think that's kind of how he got into words in the first place. He said he didn't really care about the books; it was more about getting the badges. But obviously, it served him really well. But yeah, I mean, in the 70s, Croydon had this absolutely incredible punk scene. There were venues like the Greyhound, which is just across from the Fairfield Halls, and it was it was a bit of a flea pit in some ways, but it hosted sort of all of the big bands of the time. You had like the Ramones and the Talking Heads and Elvis Costello, and then of course you get Captain Sensible and the Damned. So Captain Sensible, aka Ray Burns, the story goes that he was working in the he's working in the Fairfield Halls and cleaning toilets at the time, as his famous song called Croydon goes, and he meets Rat Scabies, and they form the Damned. So yeah, the Damned were playing in Croydon quite a bit at the time. There's one band, there's one punk band who didn't play Croydon, and that was the Sex Pistols. And it's a bit apparently this because the manager of the Greyhound didn't want to get spat at, which seems a really strange thing to say for a manager of a punk venue in the 70s, because it's like, surely you're going to get spat at every single night of the week. But that said, there's a guy called Jamie Reed who went to art college, Croydon Art College, with Malcolm McLaren, and Jamie Reed got the gig of designing the Sex Pistols album cover. That's even though the Sex Pistols never played in Croydon, there's still that link there.
There's still a link. So that is the famous, quite young Queen Elizabeth with the safety pin through her nose, isn't it? That's that famous cover with, or is it just the one with the words?
Yes, that's
the word. Because I think he also designed the Punk Queen, and that was in an exhibition actually at Buckingham Palace recently. They had a whole exhibition of images of royalty, and I thought, well, good on them to put that in as well. But I think that's part of the whole look that Jamie Reed created for the Pistols. But I was just looking at, there's another. So the book has pictures throughout, a lot of them by yourself, but I thought this was absolutely fantastic. And so this is a poster, and would have been quite common for the time, really, but listen to this, the Greyhound, Park Lane, Croydon, XTC, Ultravox, supported by Adam and the Ants, Talking Heads, Dire Straits, Suzi and the Banshees, Sham 69, the Adverts and the Rich Kids. I mean, wow. And that's sort of January, that's just January through to March, I mean, that's pretty extraordinary, isn't it? How big was that venue? I mean, you would have been in spitting distance, presumably, of those.
Yeah, quite literally. I mean,
right.
I know that that's how Captain Sensible's famous look came about. He had his beret and his glasses, and that look literally came about because he was trying to protect himself from being spat at, because obviously the more you were liked as a punk band, the more you got spat at. And so definitely within spitting distance. But I would guess it was a few hundred, like it was a very small venue, and kind of like the anarchic cousin of the Fairfield Halls across the way, sort of a much bigger music venue, which was hosting again the array of bands and performers who were playing there. One of the first was the Beatles, but you had the Rolling Stones and Pink Floyd, Dave Brubeck, Big Mama Thornton. It just goes on and on and on. And just the idea that these people were all, in Croydon, sort of any day of the week, you could see, world class music. Really, I mean, the one that everyone talks about is Jimi Hendrix playing the Star in West Croydon, just this little pub. And he apparently had to sort of climb in through the window because he couldn't come in through the door because there were too many people there to see him. So yeah, certainly in the in the 60s and 70s, like Croydon, there's this absolutely incredible place for music. I mean, I wish I could have been there, but yeah.
Yeah, it was absolutely happening, wasn't it? And I love the way you describe Captain Sensible's, his burying glasses as his kind of punk. What's it? Is it PPE?
PPE, yeah.
PPE. That's it. Yeah. It's kind of protective, because I think some of the punks really did get ill. I think Joe Strummer's meant to have got ill from somebody spitting at him. I mean, it was it's pretty revolting.
I can't imagine they were the most hygienic of times.
We can talk about something a bit healthier, again, going back in time, but Croydon's very own spa, Beulah Spa. And again, this is Croydon that's so close.
I know. Well, I kind of call it a sort of forerunner to Centre Parks in a way. So I think these spas at the time were they were pretty popular in London. You had them sort of dotted around, and in this case, I think Croydon was maybe a little bit late to the game, but basically, someone, now I can't remember what his name is, but the landowner sort of realizes that he's got this wonderful spring water on his land. I think the story goes that there's a lame horse on the field, and it drinks from a spring and sort of miraculously comes back to full health. I'm not sure that that's actually true, but it's a lovely idea. But yeah, again, so what happens very quickly is this kind of this Eden-esque kind of pleasure garden is built in Beulah Spa, which is right next to where Crystal Palace Park is today. And it's hugely popular, and there's all sorts of wonderful buildings are put up there. Decimus Burton, the guy who goes on to do the Palm House at Kew Gardens, I think this is one of his earlier jobs. And there are orchestras playing on the lawns, and you can do archery, and you've got hot air balloons taking off, and just fireworks of exploding over the gardens at night. So it's this really very, very magical place, really. And Queen Victoria goes there quite a few times. She's a big fan. But then obviously what happens in the 1850s is the Crystal Palace comes along. So it's obviously been in Hyde Park, but a few years later it gets re-erected in Sydenham. And so it is that overnight thing again for Croydon. This, you suddenly, the Beulah Spa has suddenly got this great glass palace sort of towering over it, and it's a much more exciting attraction for people. And pretty soon after that goes up, the Beulah Spa sadly sort of falls into decline. But it's another one of those places that I would just love to go back in time and see that. I mean, imagine that as a day trip: Beulah Spa followed by the Crystal Palace. That's a pretty good day out, I reckon.
So I imagine it's just completely built over. There's no trace of it left, because it does sound magical.
Yeah, there's hardly anything there. Now there is a guy called Chris Shields who I talked to for the book, and he's written a whole book about the Beulah Spa. And a few years ago, he did have a little ceremony where people dressed up, and they opened they installed a plaque to the Beulah Spa, which is a nice little touch. So you can see that there, but apart from that, you would never know that this absolutely enchanting place had been there. Well,
mention of a plaque brings me to the is it the High Street plaque?
Yeah.
I mean, there were people who did like little postcard collections of roundabouts of Great Britain or whatever, or most boring town, and it sort of sounds a bit like the most boring plaque in Britain, but tell us the story behind it.
Oh well, I'm kind of to blame. So my day job is writing for a website called Londonist, and it was quite a few years ago now. I found out about this plaque, and it basically celebrates the widening of the High Street. Now I can't remember the measurements, but the measurements are on the plaque, and I did a little article as in, like, is this the most boring plaque in London? Now, to be fair, it's actually the story behind it is more interesting, because this was done at the turn of the end of the 19th century, and it was a time when Croydon was kind of reinventing itself. By this point, you had all those trains coming in, and it had loads of train stations, and it was becoming quite a salubrious place. So it kind of, people were starting to build villas here, and you had wealthier people going, well, I can live in this lovely town and commute into the city. And as this was happening, sort of the town kind of got rebuilt basically into this this kind of shopping Shangri-La. So you suddenly get all of these amazing, beautiful sort of red brick buildings with great sort of department stores and whatnot. There was a place I believe called Remsbury's which boasted that you could buy everything from wine glasses to a horse, which I think is quite nice. But Croydon was really famous for its 3 big department stores. So it had Kennard's, Alders, and Grant's, and Kennard's was like the first of these to come along, and it was one of those grand places which sold pretty much anything that you could want. But then sort of come the 1920s, they get this sort of Australian wunderkind by the name of Jimmy Driscoll, and they get him to start running the show, and he kind of turns it into, I think I describe him as kind of part Gordon Selfridge, part Walt Disney, and he turns it into this store. It's the store that entertains to sell, and you get all of these sort of like rooftop theaters and petting zoos, and there's really swanky restaurants with their own orchestra, and there are photos. Again, there's a really good book about Kennard's actually. And the photos are incredible. It's great that someone thought to take so many photos. There are photos of this restaurant, and in one of them there's a cheetah on the table. I've got no idea why, but that's another thing they really like to do, to use animals as publicity stunts, which I think mostly that would be frowned upon now, but back in the day, these places like Kennard's were using sort of like parading elephants down the street, and they had monkeys sort of escaping from the monkey village and climbing up onto the roof and doing a little dance. All this kind of stuff was going on. So yeah, I mean, if you they certainly knew how to get people in through the doors, that's for sure.
That's reminded me of a time that I worked in Canary Wharf when I was working for the newspaper, The Independent, on Sunday. And as I was either going to lunch or coming back from lunch, I was waiting for a lift, and the doors opened and there was somebody inside, and they had, I think, a tiger on a leash, probably quite a small one. And then the doors shut again, and you're left thinking, what just happened? But there was a sort of photographic studio a couple of floors up. So, I mean, I imagine, and I sort of imagined that it had some kind of jeweled collar on, but so that's just reminded me of that.
Apparently at the Whitgift Centre, they were parading people. Yeah, no, you can't. I think there were tiger cubs being walked through the Whitgift Centre in the 60s or 70s, apparently like promoting trips to Longleat, which again, yeah, can't imagine it now.
I mean, a lot of the story is about a complete absence of health and safety over the centuries.
Yeah, good.
So it's absolutely full of amazing stories, and I just thought I'd talk a little bit about the cover, because that might be the most famous or infamous building in Croydon. I mean, we've got the little biplane, we have Stormzy, and then cranes. It all means something, but
It does, yeah.
This building has a lot of funny nicknames, hasn't it?
Yeah, so this is the building that sort of came along at the height of Croydonisation, really. So it was originally the NLA Tower, built for a pensions company, but it was designed by Richard Seifert, the guy who sort of infamously did Centrepoint in central London. But I think the NLA Tower, which is also known as, now what is it called? It's called the Threepenny Bit to some people. Other people know. Then decimalisation came along, so it got known as the 50p building. It's officially now called One Croydon at the moment. But it's this really unique building, which sort of just sums up, the moment in time when Croydon was really channeling this kind of space age vibe, really. And there's no need for it to be that adventurous, but it is. And I don't really know anyone who hates it. I think pretty much all Croydonians kind of have this real sort of respect for it, and it is kind of the icon of the town in many ways. It's one of the first things you see if you come into into East Croydon station by train. That's what you'll see sort of looming up in front of you. I think people really have a soft spot for it. So back in the day, it kind of had, I think it had a sort of a rooftop restaurant, and obviously it was full of offices. In recent years, it's kind of I don't know how many people are working in there now, but not so many. But I heard just a week or two ago that there are now plans afoot to turn it into apartments, which could be very cool. I actually think that will be an extremely popular move if that happens, because as we've discussed, Croydon's very well connected. But imagine being able to just step off the train and go home to that building. Although I've also heard that they're trying to divide each floor into sort of 10 apartments, which is a little bit strange because the floors are octagonal, so dividing an octagon into 10 seems a bit I mean, I'm not a mathematician, but yeah. But I think everyone really really goes for that building, and even people who maybe I think it's one of those things where people will see it and recognize it even if they don't know it's in Croydon. But yeah, I mean, I personally love it. I was trying really hard to get inside there for the book, but unfortunately I couldn't get access to it. So it's on my hit list. It's difficult to get inside that one, I think.
I mean, what is it? It is just offices, so nobody could get you a secret pass. That is a shame, actually, because no, if this book doesn't open doors like that, it's a poor. It's a poor.
It opened a lot of doors, but not that particular one, unfortunately.
As the story goes on, I mean, there are darker elements now, aren't there, with things like, the well-publicised problems that the council has had financially, and, these great projects and great ideas that are not getting off the ground, or, they're turning into sort of financial black holes. Where is Croydon at now?
That is the question that every
it was a city of culture, which seems to have gone rather well.
Borough of Culture was great. So as you say, I think there's been there's no secret about the fact that Croydon is at this kind of difficult crossroads. There have been sort of this litany of things that haven't gone quite right for it in the last decade or so. So the Whitgift Centre, which we were talking about at the beginning, was meant to have been demolished a long time ago and replaced with a Westfield shopping centre. That is still to come. That hasn't happened. There was a thing with a company called Brick by Brick, where a lot of money was lost by the council. There have been criticisms about the refurbishment of Fairfield Halls. Obviously, there have been big problems with knife crime and things like that. Although that's certainly not exclusive to Croydon. So yeah, I mean, it's that a lot of stuff isn't quite going right for Croydon at the moment. It's also like the building. There are certain projects, the Nestle Tower or St George's House is one of these things that was meant to have been turned into luxury apartments quite a while ago, but there were financial difficulties, and that's kind of stalled. And I think there's a lot of stalling going on in Croydon at the moment. Projects that kind of start and then suddenly one day they're just not happening anymore, and no one knows what's going on. So it's almost the opposite of historically with Croydon, where it just went out and did things. and you know, see what happens down the line. Now it's kind of, you know, a lot of stuff is stalling. Borough of Culture, which was sort of across it started in April 23 and finished a year later. I think that's been really good. I think there was, you know, it's a proper celebration of the past of Croydon, all of the amazing things that it's achieved culturally, but there's definitely some looking to the future as well, and you begin to realize just how many people and societies and whatnot are really invested in Croydon. There is this real positivity about it when you sort of look beyond the kind of you know, horizon of skyscrapers or whatever. So I think there's a lot going on, and I feel like Croydon could be on the cusp of, you know, becoming this great place once again. But there's definitely work to be done. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in a way, the story of the show, the Peep Show TV show, says a lot about Croydon, in which it seems to have started almost as a little, again, the joke about Croydon being, you know, a place where sort of slightly sad sacks like the two guys in that show would live. Yeah. But then it ended up being quite a positive thing, and people, you know, felt fond of it as a result of the show. I mean, the show actually, you know, did put Croydon forward as a place for, you know, I don't know, eccentrics or...
It did. It's a shame, because I for the book I did interview Jeremy Wooding, who was he directed the first series of Peep Show, and it's a bit of a pity really, because he really wanted Croydon to be you know, at the forefront of Peep Show. So you'd see the characters riding the trams, and you'd see like the one Croydon building, and you'd know that it was Croydon. And the problem with this, he told me, was that The Office had just come out, and obviously, you know, The Office was giving Slough a bit of a bad rap, and I think the people, the producers, or the people at Channel 4 or whoever it was, were kind of worried that they were going to be seen to be copying The Office if they just started dissing Croydon. So the weird thing is, like, when you know, it's, you know, Croydon gets mentioned every now and again, but it's kind of, it's sort of in the background. And actually, I think it becomes bolder as the series go on. You notice that they talk about Croydon a little bit more, but I think it's kind of one of the missed opportunities for Croydon, that they're not just banging on about Croydon all the time in Peep Show, because I think that would have been pretty wonderful. But at the same time, it's still, you know, back in the day, people obviously, you know, cottoned on to the fact that it was Croydon, and there was, you know, sort of a very mini tourism boom for people going to see the locations.
Is there, I mean, we've talked about going back in time to Beulah Spa, but is there somewhere you'd have loved to visit or seen, somewhere that's been demolished long since, that would be cool if it was still there?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think I would love to have. I mean, so Croydon Airport is still there, or the sort of the neoclassical building that was built in the late 20s. Like, miraculously for Croydon, it's still there, and it's there as an airport. Sorry, not as an airport, as a museum today, and you can visit it on the first Sunday of every month, and I'd always recommend people go. It actually sells out all the time. However, I would love to have gone up in a Handley Page. So they were kind of the epitome of, for me, you know, the golden age of air travel. So they came along in the 1930s when Croydon was at its peak, and there's these gorgeous silver biplanes. And there was a silver wing service which departed from Croydon at 12:30 p.m. Every day, including Sundays, and it flew over to Paris. And there's just this idea of getting on one of these Handley Pages with its wicker chairs, and you take off and you can see the Croydon below you, and you've got these sort of stewards in white jackets serving you up a cocktail or a glass of champagne. In-flight meals sourced fresh from Surrey Street Market. Quite incredible. It was really glamorous age, and Agatha Christie she wrote Death in the Clouds, I think, in 1935, which is based on a plane that's coming into land at Croydon Airport, and someone gets murdered just as it's about to touch down. But so I think going up in a Handley Page and flying over the whole of, if I can be greedy, just the whole of Croydon as it was before it was sort of had that double whammy of being bombed in the Second World War, then obviously totally rebuilding itself in the 50s through to the 70s. Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah, it's a great choice. Before we get on to the final three questions, I was very intrigued by what is possibly another symbol of Croydon, which is the Grade 2 listed diving board that doesn't have anywhere that you can actually dive into. So it must look very strange. I mean, A, it must be a pretty spectacular diving board, and B, it doesn't have any function anymore.
Yeah, I do. Like, not a lot of stuff. Like, it's the funny thing, because the one Croydon building is not listed yet, which to me seems insane. But there is a listed diving board, and it's just across from the airport, and it's this beautiful Art Deco structure, really. But it used to be part of the Purley Way Lido, which was sort of, again, it must have been one of the best Lidos in London. Well, I get, it was in Surrey at the time, but it would be in London now. And it's such a shame. I think it was the first pool to be sort of like heated and lit by electricity. It fitted about 2,000 people in it in one go. I'm not sure there always were 2,000 people, but it could hold that. It had sort of palm trees around the edge, and you had all of these amazing performers. It comes sort of water acrobats and all this kind of stuff. So again, it was this amazing place that Croydon had, and then sort of just decided to get rid of. I think in the late 70s that went, and I think it moved a bit too quickly, because nowadays Lidos are obviously so popular, and London's full of wonderful Lidos. But I genuinely think if the Purley Way Lido was still there, it would be the best Lido in London, because it was just so huge and so glamorous back in the day. It's up there with Tooting, I would say. So yeah, such a shame. I mean, I would love to see that come back, but it's not going to happen, because it's sort of, it's on an industrial estate now. So yeah, you just got this kind of this beautiful diving board, but below it is just a load of concrete, which does that sum up? I don't know if it sums up Croydon, but it's certainly it says something.
Croydon, quick to innovate, but also quick to kind of get rid of things and move on. That's part of the story you tell, I think. So anyway, on to the three questions, which do not have to be Croydon related, I should say. But do you have a favourite artwork?
Yeah, can I slightly cheat and say the London Underground map as designed by Harry Beck? Because for me, that's kind of it's if you are it is an artwork. It's also one of the most practical designs of all time. But I think it's particularly fitting, because I think it's just that it's the 50th anniversary of his death right now. But for me, it's so iconic, and it's so beautiful and instantly recognizable. And I mean, you just have to look at how many alternative tube maps there are to see, like, people are absolutely obsessed with the tube map, and I just think it's a thing of absolute beauty. I love it.
I mean, the network can look like sort of Wrigley spaghetti, and he just made the decision, didn't he, to have the grid and very few, I mean, it is a masterpiece, actually. of design, but also artists have riffed on it, haven't they? They've kind of used the format and put different names and things. So I think it's a very creditable artwork that we kind of use every day if we're in London.
For sure. Absolutely
incredible. No, that's a great choice. The next one, do you have a book of shame that you want to reveal to us?
A book of shame. I'm trying to think what my book of shame would be. I mean, I'm not like maybe I shouldn't admit this being on being on this video, but I'm not the best reader in the world. Like I try my best, but I'm at the moment I'm trying to get into audiobooks and stuff like that because I'm really bad at finding time to read. But I mean, book of shame. I definitely. I don't think it's shame, but I absolutely love all of the old sort of like Beano annuals because like as a kid I used to collect them and sort of buy them from car boot sales and whatever. And once in a while I can't say that I read them a lot, but once in a while I'll sort of take one down from the shelf and have a leaf through because I think they're absolutely wonderful. They're just there's something about the humor and the characters which I absolutely adore. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to admit that I still read the Beano, but occasionally I have a little thumb through an old annual or something. Yeah.
So it's a guilty pleasure rather than a book of shame, shall we say? I think
let's go with that.
Yeah, we have guilty pleasures as well. So maybe that's a question that I'll ask some other people. I mean, we've had some very interesting responses. I mean, I think somebody said they hadn't read any Dickens, that, my jaw sort of hit the floor at that point. But yeah, and then so many nominations for Ulysses that I just think we can say you don't ever need to feel ashamed about not reading Ulysses. And finally, Will, have you ever had any, I mean, you mentioned the website Londonist. I mean, this is a question about any aspect of your work, really, but have you ever had any funny or bizarre comments on anything you've written?
Well, I mean, working for Londonist, if we go back to the Tube, that you get, we have. I love all of our readers, but there are certain people who are kind of slightly pedantic about things, and the number one thing that people are pedantic about is when you call the London Underground the Tube, and it's actually a section which is pre-Tube, so it was actually built using the cut and cover method, so it technically wasn't tunneled as a tube. It was, it's cut and cover, and therefore, so if you say something about the Metropolitan line being the Tube, you might get an email or two saying, yeah, it's not the Tube actually, it's the London Underground. And it's kind of like, well, yes, but I think people have come over the decades have come to learn the shorthand. It's the same thing with Big Ben. If you call the Elizabeth Tower Big Ben,
I'm a bit like that actually. I've been known to correct tourists. Yeah, it's the bell, isn't it?
But it is. But I think it's it's come to be known as shorthand for Big Ben. So I think it's kind of, it's okay. And there's also route master buses. Sometimes if you call a bus a route master and it's actually an RT, the bus that its predecessor, people do not like that. And I'm not a bus nerd, so sometimes I will see an RT and assume it's a route master and get it wrong. So yeah.
Oh my word. So the Tube thing, is that something to do with whether the trains are sort of actually tube-like or whether they're sort of more like that?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it was that method where in the early days they didn't have the tunneling equipment, so the lines were a lot shallower, and then as it went on, they went deeper and sort of tunneled through with boring machines or whatever.
Right.
As for the actual shape of the tube trains, I don't know. So we're now going to maybe some pedants will get in touch about that. I'm not sure if what bearing it has on the actual tube trains. That's a good question.
Well, I noticed that sort of going out on the Metropolitan line, that they're slightly sort of taller trains, and a lot of the Metropolitan line is above ground. And I think it's also a very old line. And then the other ones, they're more like worms. So let's not, I mean, yeah, that's a rabbit hole, if not a tube hole that we probably shouldn't go down. I'm going to let you go, but thanks for talking to me. It has been incredibly good fun, both reading the book and talking to you. Croydonopolis. I mean, we haven't got onto your lively writing style, but there's a lot of jokes and fun, and it's an incredible book. So thank you for writing it, and thank you for being on the book bag.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. And thank you for watching. Join me next time for another invigorating chat. I'm not sure we're going to go into the depths of tube lines and tube maps again, but hasn't it been fun talking about Croydon? I must go there. I must go there instead of just passing through on my way to the airport. Maybe you'll join me. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.